Hey everyone, how is it going? And welcome back here for another episode with some PLO content. My name is Luke. Hope you're all doing well. Last week we looked into an interesting hand where we had a decision to make on the flop whether or not to call or stack off right away when we get check raised on the flop. Well, this week we are going to look into a somewhat similar spot. It is gonna be a massive pot. Almost 700 big blinds are going into the pot right away on the flop. We're gonna look into the hand first. It's a single raise pot. After looking into the hand, we're gonna analyze it again using Pokerjuice, and we're gonna make a decision, and we're gonna find out whether or not we played the hand correctly or if we could have done something better. We're going to jump right into the hand. Here you can see it. We are sitting in middle position with ace 6-5 single suited. We're open raising and the cutoff decides to go for the call. The rest of the players fold and we flop massively, of course. We have an overpair of aces with a nut flush. In addition, we're also holding the nut open-ender, so a very strong hand here. Our opponent does go for the pre-flop call. Like when we think about pre-flop ranges in player and connection to the board, like our range will have some nuttiness on this texture here, mainly in the form of overpairs with high flush draws. The connection to the low end of the board, also the connection when it comes to two pairs and set, isn't extremely high, so we won't have too many strong made hands there and draws when it comes to straight draws, but occasionally we do have them in combination with mainly overpairs. Now our hand obviously has all the components together. When we think about our opponent's cold calling range in general, this board will also not hit his range too strongly. He will also have like kings and queens, some jack X, some draws, some flush draws. Occasionally he will have a straight draw or some reps here. He can have nut flush draws in his range, but he won't have too many two pairs and sets or either on this texture. That being said, my hand, we can go either way here. We are extremely deep, as you can see. We're sitting on 337 big blinds here. We're playing PLO 100. So we can go, like, we can bet. We definitely want to make sure a bet goes in on the flop, as I would say, think here. Like, if our opponent is quite stab heavy, we can go for a check raise. Check raising is totally fine, as we can get more money into the pot. But we can also go for a bet here. That being said, I decided to bet here, just making sure some money is going in onto the flop. My opponent goes for the raise on the flop. He raises fairly small to like $15, $15.50. At this point, I do think my hand is strong enough to come over the top and put in some more money. Like there are still some hands in his raising range that we heavily dominate. Occasionally we'll also have like some two pairs or sets, of course, in this raising range against which we will do fine. We're not crushing against all of those, but we're also not far behind, of course. You can have some bluff raises in there occasionally, not too many I expect, but I think just overall, given everything, I think my hand is strong enough to come over the top here and raise. So I did raise. And at this point, it becomes interesting when my opponent decides to pot it here. And when you think about this situation in game, like I would think my opponent is gonna do this like probably over 95% of the time with jacks. Maybe he can sprinkle in a couple of other hands. But specifically, given removals, given that we have the nut flush draw, given that we have 5-6 blocking some of the wrap combinations, given that we have the flush draw, I mean, it's just extremely likely, given this line, we bet he raises, we come over the top, and now he comes over the top. I mean, I don't see much hands other than jacks here in his range. Occasionally, he might have a hand like 4, 5, 6, maybe king, 6, 5, but I mean, that's already extremely unlikely, I would say. Maybe some 3s or 4s with like additional backup, but those hands make up a very small portion of his pre-flop range, and also they cannot come with a nut flush draw. We are blocking 5, 6. So all in all, I think jacks are just almost exclusively in his range here, and that would simplify our decision here in a way later in the analysis. Anyway, in game, I felt like even against jacks, I can stack off profitably here. My hand is strong enough, and we have enough equity at this point to stack off. I did decide to get the money in. We are turning a straight. We win the first run, and also in the second run, we hit the nut straight. And we take down a great pot as my opponent was holding top set. with a gutter with the ace-5, and he was also holding a blocker to the clubs with a jack of clubs there. I mean, a massive setup here for both, of course. Extremely strong hands, not too much we could have done differently from both players. At least that was my perception of the spot. But looking into it a little bit deeper, we want to learn more about whether or not we could have done something differently and whether our shove on the flop after he rejams again was actually the correct play. So to figure that out, we're going to jump into Pokerjuice, and this is the setup. Okay, here we see the hand, similar as in our hand analysis in Hold'em Manager. We're opening it up here. My opponent calls. I gave him a range of around 15% of cold calls here. It's a little bit more than GTO and what recommended, but I think most players will play those hands. I think this opponent was somewhat of a thinking player, and he will probably still call a few more hands than he should, but I would say 15% is totally fine here to give him that range. Pre-flop, we're going to the flop here, and against his flop pre-flop range we have 85% equity, of course. It's a great hand. We're gonna start putting in some money here. My opponent raises it up, we come over the top, and at this point my opponent shoves or pots. Okay, so what should we do here and what would we have done? So we get the money in here, and we are running it twice and we win twice. However, let's give my opponent a raising range that he comes up with in this specific situation. After raising, we re-raising, and he shoves on the flop by potting here. Let's give him only jacks, which is just, it's somewhat of a simplification, but it is just the range he will come up with, show up with here, like almost always. Against jacks, we have 47% equity, and to stack off, we need 42.48%. So we can stack off here. Now, if we would stack off, and we're going to use the shove model for that, which is this one, we're going to give him jacks as a range. We're going to first of all look like how much money are we making if we're shoving versus jacks here at this point. So if we shove, we're going to make $31.56, which is 31.56 big blinds, which is fine and it is good, but don't forget that it's a massive pot. It's almost 700 big blinds. So yes, it's okay, but it's also not extremely high, and maybe we can do better than this. So to figure this out, we have to think about our alternative, which is calling and then stacking off on turns and maybe even folding a couple of turns. So to do this, in Pokerjuice, there is a great tool which is called the Peel and Stack Off module. And in this module, we can basically see like what is happening if we would call and potentially fold on a couple of very bad turns. So let's imagine we would call this hand on the next street, which is the turn. We would need 27.44% equity to stack off. Now, many hands, many turn cards will give us that equity. We can turn straights, we can turn flushes, we can turn some blanks, maybe even that are good for us, but maybe there are also some bad ones for us where we don't have that equity. So Pokerjuice has this feature which will calculate like how much we're gonna make if we would call and then stack off on the right turns where we do have this equity or more, and fold on the turns where we don't have this equity. So to do that, we're gonna click on the play button here. And now Pokerjuice is gonna calculate basically the EV of peeling and then stacking off on the right turns. After this is done, I'm gonna look into the equity graph also, and I'm gonna show you like which cards are actually the good ones and which are actually the bad ones. Now this takes a while because it's basically simulating all these runouts, and it's gonna calculate like how much we're gonna make after calling, looking into different turns, and then deciding what the EV of peeling and then stacking off is. Now this feature does basically show our action versus our opponent, who's always going to stack off on the turn. So there's basically no fold equity anymore on the turn, but I think that's fine. Like if he has jacks, even on a flush turn or a straight turn, I mean, when the SPR gets pretty shallow on the turn, I mean, he's never going to fold anymore with jacks, even if the turn would be like the 5 of clubs, for example. So he will stack off almost always there, and I think that is reasonable, especially given how people will perceive the spot. So as you can see, it takes a little while because there are a lot of simulations that it has to calculate. But we will get there. Here you can already see some percentages here, which are saying 84 and 16, which basically means that on average we can stack off on 84% of the turn cards and fold on 16% of the turn cards. And our equity on average, if we stack off here, is 54%. So that's actually better than we have here. So at this point we have 47. So by calling, we can increase that to 54 on average. What is more interesting is actually the EV of peeling here. You can see here that if we would decide to peel and then stack off on the right turns, we're actually going to make $48 instead of the 32 that we saw here, 31.5. So that's quite an increasement in terms of EV. So $16 more we can make by making this play. Now the question is, what turns are the ones that we should stack off and fold? And to look into that, we're going to use the equity graph, which is this feature. I already showed it to you quickly in the last episode also. Let me make it so that we can also see the hand. I'm going to click on the play button, and here all the turn transitions are there. You can see these are the best turns. We have all the green ones, which are the clubs. We have the deuces, the aces, the sevens, giving us straights, on which we have like from 100 to 71% equity. Here are all the blanks, which will give us everything going from 39% equity up until 32% equity. So all these equities are higher than 27, so we can stack off. But the interesting thing comes when we look at the pairing cards. The fours, the threes, and the jacks. So you can see that on these cards, we basically has almost 0% equity. It goes from 8% to like 1%, 2% here. And what we now see is that we can actually call and fold on these ones, call and stack off on all these ones. And by doing this, we can make $48 instead of just shoving the flop and making $32. So I think that's a pretty cool and interesting takeaway. I think in game, I was somewhat shocked, or I was just too quickly by thinking, well, we have a massive hand, we can get the money in, and wasn't even seriously considering. I mean, maybe a little bit, but like not too consciously, like, okay, we can call and then fold on a 3 or a 4 or a jack. It just feels so bad in a way to invest $100 more and then fold suddenly on a 3. But now we learned that that is actually superior to just getting the money in, because we can stack off so profitably on a lot of turns with more equity on average and fold a few of the very worst ones and make way more money than just getting the money in here. So I hope that showed you how important it is to really consciously think about sometimes not getting the money in right away, but peeling and then stacking off on the next street. And it definitely gave me some insights. I think this is one of the spots where I can definitely improve on as a player, and where we can have some interesting takeaways and some progression when it comes to our overall understanding of the game. So this one showed that example. Also the one of last week had some interesting takeaways there. Hope you enjoyed this one. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you did. If you have any questions, as usual, use the comment section below, and I will look forward to seeing you back with another episode here soon on YouTube. Take care, have a great day, and peace. Have a good day.